We're live. Hello. Thank you for joining me. Not at the Excel Centre in London to mark this occasion of Salute 2020 not going ahead. Leastways, I hope you're not at the Excel Centre in London. If you are at the Excel Centre in London, or you have family or friends who are there, or at any of the other COVID hospitals in the UK and across the world, then our thoughts and our prayers are with you and your families. Hope everyone's safe and recovers well. So I did not get up at 4 o'clock this morning, did not drive to East London, did not drive into the Excel Centre, set up my stand, and I'm not currently selling things to people. So it's a bit different to last year. Last year was my first time at Salute, and it's very strange how quickly it becomes the mainstay, the main show of the year. A lot of our releases that I had planned for the next 6 months were predicated on the kind of sales that we took at Salute last year, and I'm in a fortunate position that my business is a part-time business. I have a full-time job as well that pays the bills, so I'm quite a good position. But I know there are a lot of traders who would have been at Salute who rely on that as a significant source of income for the year. So if you do have a chance to pop onto the website or go to the Salute website, you'll see the traders who would have been there. Have a look through their stuff, and if you can place an order, a lot of them will still be online and will still be trading, and would really appreciate your business, having not been able to sell stuff at Salute. And a lot of them are doing special offers over this weekend as well to mark the Salute thing. So do go and check them out. And help them out. As I say, we're in a fortunate position. All that it means for us is that a few things that were going to happen later this year will either not happen later this year, they'll happen next year, hopefully, or it means that stuff will go to Kickstarter that would otherwise have been a straight release. So we'll be okay. We'll manage to pull through and carry on, I hope. So yeah, so I'm sat at home in my dining room. Please excuse if people walk through to get cups of tea and lunch and various other things, or you hear noises going on elsewhere. I paused the washing machine, so hopefully that won't be a distraction, but do excuse those things that are going on. And I'll be here until about 4 o'clock, just chatting. One of the things that we normally enjoy about going to shows is being able to talk to people, and ironically Salute is usually, I say usually, I only did it once from last year. Salute is the occasion where that's not really that possible. You start talking to people, and then you've got to run off somewhere else and answer someone else's question, or take money off people. Oh, terrible, taking money off people. So Salute wasn't a brilliant opportunity for conversations, but hopefully Colours will still be running. Hopefully we'll be at Colours. Hopefully Dragon Days will still be running and we'll be there. Hopefully Dragon Meet will still be running and we'll be there. I can't guarantee any of the other shows will be. I can't guarantee those will be running, but yeah, we'll see. Hopefully we'll see you at some shows and manage to talk face to face. But for now, this is just an opportunity. Throw anything you want at me. I will try and answer in as coherent a fashion as I can the questions that you might have, and it can be anything. It can be to do with inspiration, it can be to do with the process of game design, it can be to do with sculpting, with painting, with trying to run a business, with things you'd like to see, with questions about the rules, questions about inspiration, or it can be completely unrelated. It could be like, what music do you listen to while you're painting, or I don't know, what's your favorite color, or where did you go to school, or anything like stupid, ridiculous questions. But anything that you like, please pop a thing on the live chat if you've got some questions. My laptop's up here, so I'll keep an eye on the live chat. I've got my phone as well, so if you want to send me any messages via Facebook or emails on my website if your live chat isn't working. I don't know for sure whether live chat will be working or not, but if it's not, other means of communication, probably don't try and phone me. I won't be answering during the thing, but send me any questions you like. I've got a few things here people had sent in advance, so I will be looking at working through some of those questions. And I've got some sculpting on the side here. One of the things that I did in the first few years of doing shows, when I was doing some of the smaller local shows, which I still like to go to, but one year I was doing I think 14 shows over the course of a year. And when it's your full-time job, I'm sure it's fine. But when it takes a week to prep for a show, and then at least one weekend in every 4, you're going off somewhere, driving off for a couple of hours, sitting behind a table for a day, and then coming back. It's quite wearing on family life. So I've tried to cut right back, but there are a few that I still do. But the smaller shows, when you've got fewer people around, you're not running here, there, and everywhere. I like to take a bit of sculpting, or possibly a bit of painting, but usually a bit of sculpting, because people don't see you perhaps quite so often. And sit there and do that, and try and be a non-threatening presence, so that people can come over and they can look and they can browse and they can ask questions and don't feel like there's any pressure to sell, because I wouldn't want to think that anyone feels like they can't approach me and talk to me, and I'm not going to force miniatures on them, although they'll probably end up walking away with a few. But I'm very much relaxed at shows. I don't go for the pressure sell. So never feel that you can't approach and ask anything that you like. I'm quite a shy, retiring person, so I'm not very good at approaching people and making eye contact and asking, if you're all right, would you like me help with this and that? And I'll just sort of sit there. So if there's anything that you want to know, just ask me, and I will try and find it. So let's have a look at what some of the questions were that people sent in. So let's start off with this one. Edward sent me a question about dragons. So you may, Chappy, I've got a few miniatures sat here, and I've got this impromptu cardboard box here because I know that my webcam all and the stuff in the background. So I'm hoping that if I take a white thing and I hold it near there, it'll actually focus. It's working quite well. So this is the aid worm or the ETH worm, and we'll get to pronunciations a bit later on. That's another question I've got. And this is actually the lead one. This is quite a hefty beast. And these are sporadically available through the website, and I try to get stocked up for shows. So we did have some at Dragon Meet last year. We had some resin ones, and they disappeared very, very fast. They were gone in the space of about a week. The lead ones, I can show you the mold. I've got that out ready, just because I thought it would be interesting for people to see that. So this is a spin cast mold, a centrifugal cast, and this is the mold that the dragon was in. It just about fits in a single mold. And actually, this mold is not in too bad a shape. When I spoke with the chaps who were doing the molding for this, I said, how many, because he's quite spiky. He's got a lot of these horns on the back here that can rip molds. And I said, how many reasonably, I want to do a run in metal because I'm pretty old school and I like big, heavy models, even though there are a pain in the backside to stick together. Sometimes this guy's been very heavily pinned. But I like the weight of metal models. So I said, how many realistically can we get out of a spin cast mold? And they said, maybe 30. So I'm okay, fine, 30. So they said, we're going to do a limited run of 30 of these guys in metal. And we did that, and they lasted probably about 6 months. to sell through the 30. But he was mastered in resin first, so we had a low risk method of producing him, and the resin ones are still available, still in production. The mold for those is with Shed Games up in Tewkesbury. Most of my casting now is done by Shed Games and Macrocosm. They do a partnership. Macrocosm do the metal casting, and Shed Games do the resin stuff. And that's very convenient for me because I can just I'm in Stroud, so I can just run up the motorway, drop stuff off. I don't have to risk putting things in the post, which is always a bit hair raising, and it means I can go and pick stuff up. So when I picked up the batch of castings in preparation for Salute, when we thought it might go ahead, I picked up about 30 kilograms worth of metal. Well, the cost of putting that in the post would have been ridiculous. But I can drive for 20 minutes up the M5 and go and pick that up, so that's pretty handy. But Chris, who runs Shed Games, is inundated. I think since Hysterical particularly disappeared, was that last year or the year before? He's been massively inundated with orders, and his work is very, very good. It's understandable that he'd be inundated with orders, but it means that it can take quite a long time. He's only one guy in about 3 sheds now he's got going, and it can take quite a long time to get things from him. So I ordered some dragons about this time last year, not for Salute, but for Fantasy Forest Festival in June, which is also not running, unfortunately, this year. Otherwise, we'd have been up there again at Sudeley Castle. But I tried to get them in for that, and actually, I got casts in October, I think, having put the order in this time last year. So he was very busy. So there's a kind of a rolling order of dragons that he'll send me a batch, and then a month later I'll say, can you put it back in the queue, probably. So at some point I may get another batch of dragons in, and they'll go on the website when they're available, and I'll put out an announcement about that. But the question wasn't when will they be available again. The question was, if you could work on another large monster, what would you do? And what do you have to do differently in terms of sculpting a large model? So what would I do? I would. I'm tempted to go with another dragon. Dragons are one of those things that so many different folklores interpret the same kind of concept quite differently. So there's all kinds of scope for dragons, and you'll know that because there are so many dragons available. It's like the fantasy thing to do a dragon, and I've done a dragon now. I did him as a replacement stand-in for getting a great spined dragon, because I thought I'm never going to get a great spined dragon. I'm not paying £200 on eBay for a great spined dragon, and then managed. A friend gave me a very good deal on a great spine, so I have actually got a great spine. But that's why I sculpted him in the first place. I have this sort of underlying thought with the World of the Woods, having started writing a few different scenarios that may become source books a bit later on. That there are these myriad different worms living under the earth, and that they're all sleeping currently, but the various activities that are going on across Talamar are awakening these worms. So I might look at doing a few different worms, different incarnations of dragons. The trolls have been fun to do. And actually, one of the things that I'm working on currently, or wanting to work on, is replacing Spriggans. So currently, I have just discontinued our Spriggans. Here's one of them, and these Spriggans are based on an illustration from this book. Oh, there you go. Come to it straight away. This is based on an illustration by Brian Froud in the Fairies book. And I was fortunate enough when I got to see Brian at the Fairy Festival last year, and he signed this. I managed to give him a version of that Spriggan painted up, and he was quite pleased with that. So that was very satisfying. But I want to rework them slightly because although I like the design of these guys, the ankle on him is quite a weak point, so that's actually snapped and been pinned previously. His fingers here, they're quite thin, so there were some instances of miscasts coming out around those. Those are more things that I need to be aware of when I redesign these. So I'll be working on redesigning Spriggans, but they're not that large compared to the dragon. The dragon is a much larger creature. Here's the forest troll that I did last year, and you can see he's quite considerably bigger, big enough that it was worth going into resin with him rather than in lead. And again, I've just got some new stock of him. I'll talk about that a bit later on. So he's just about in that larger category. But these things really, if I can do them as one piece and I can do them in metal, then I will do, just because that's how I prefer to release them. But the big things that need to go into resin, what do I have in mind that I could do? It's an interesting question, because really, I think dragon was the thing that I was very, very keen to do, and having done one, I would like to revisit it, but I'm quite happy with that sculpt. So there's nothing really pressing on my mind at the moment of large things, except possibly doing some scenery bits. I would like to do some scenery bits, particularly for the Factious Waste world. Actually, I've got an idea for some sort of modular city corridors and things that have been ticking over for a couple of years. So I might start working on those again, and those would be big resin pieces. But in terms of creatures, I think everything, I'm going to try and keep everything to the small size that can be done in metal as much as possible. Things you need to consider when doing the large pieces. With all of sculpting, the armature is very key for getting things anatomically right and in the right position, and that can be a bit of a challenge when you've got something this size, because you've got to try and work in around limbs. When I'm working on a sculpt, let's say like these guys that I did for the video last week, it can be tricky getting in around the arms, but actually in this pose, there's nothing that's really totally inaccessible. If the arms were going across the body, they were holding something perhaps, then you just keep the arms bent up out of the way, work on the rest of it, bend the arms into place and do those afterwards. You can't do that quite so easily on something where you've got a large thing posed, because you've got to keep in mind where the balance is, where the weight on it is. So that I needed to know, putting the musculature in here on the belly, I needed to know where that was in relation to this leg that's supporting it, because it will sag away from that point, and also because where the tail goes needs to be supporting this part of the leg. So what I tend to do with the larger pieces is do the central, like the spine, particularly of this one, and put where the shoulders are coming off it, so that it's in proportion, but not pose it at that point, and then bulk out. Like, I knew that this needed a large rib cage and a large belly here, so do that in large blocks of milliput, and get the basic shape of the spine, and then start bending the arms into place. So it's more of a bulk it up and then refine it. Whereas these figures, if you bulk up too much, then you don't get the definition of where the muscles are. These are much better to be worked up from the ground up in muscle groups. With the larger creatures, I tend to try and get the silhouette of the shape that I want in a coarse putty like milliput first, and then refine it. This guy was done. The outer layer was in Procreate, pretty much in each Procreate over the top of the milliput. I remember when I finished it, because Procreate has that kind of grey plastic sheen, it looked very much like a sort of toy dragon. So yeah, that was weird, going from what looked like a toy plastic dragon into a very heavy metal piece. But yeah, it's come out quite nicely. So the other thing obviously is cutting it up. So this guy comes in, what have you got? Tail, and that back leg is one piece. Body to there is one piece. Head is one piece. That leg is one piece. That leg is one piece. This arm is molded onto the torso. So it's a very multi-part piece. I'm not a fan of multi-part kits, either metal kits or plastic kits. To me, they're all a pain to stick together. The metal ones are a pain because sometimes when they're quite thin, if you've got a hand, I put together some of the Amazons that I sculpted for the C30 project last week, and the people who commissioned them were very, very insistent that they wanted separate hands and separate heads so that they could be swapped around and interchanged. And I get that modularity, but when you're trying to handle on the tabletop a regiment of models and they've all got hands that can be snapped off so easily, it's a nightmare. So I prefer to do everything as single piece castings as much as I possibly can. But that's not possible with the large pieces. It's possible with this guy. I managed to keep everything one piece on him, everything touches the body. But with the dragon, you'd get a very static lump if you tried to do it in one piece. That's also obviously particularly the case if you're going to do it into metal, because that isn't going to fit in that mold like that, or spin like that if it does. So it needs to be in pieces so that it can be spaced around the center of the mold. For resin, you could possibly do that as one piece, but the way that you would have to lay it out would mean that you would end up ripping the mold, and you'd be getting through the mold so quickly that it would probably not be financially worth doing, or you'd have to charge a lot for the model in order to do that. So yeah, it has to be a model. You need to plan very carefully how those parts go together, how you're going to cut them off the model, and then put sockets on in place. And I haven't, to be honest, come up with a really good way of doing that. I keep meaning to ask Trish Morrison about it, and she's quite active on Facebook and has done so many monsters, how she does multi-part things. So I did a horse a few years ago that is quite large and is actually going to be part of the mounted Faye Marshall when they come out. But the core of that, I did around some plasticine, because I thought if I have a plasticine core and then I put a skin of putty around the outside of it, I can just saw along the middle, crack it open, and it can be hollow and it'll cut down on the metal use. And that did work, except that because the putty that then layer was quite thin, when it went in the vulcanized mold, it splayed it out a little bit, so it needed a little bit of correction to get it back together. But that's yeah. So I've got some comments. Let me have a look. What are we going on here? Okay. Thank you, Badlander Outsider. If you do work on into some games, let me know. Yes, we haven't got any rules for them currently, because a dragon versus people in the woods, it would be pretty terrifying. But yeah, maybe I should think that he would certainly have stats higher than 6. I'll have to have a look at that. Fit Page says, what's your preferred putty and why? Well, we're talking about sculpting. At the moment, I'm using green stuff, just straight green stuff. And the only reason that I'm using straight green stuff at the moment is because my other putties have gone off. I had a bulk lot of Procreate a couple of years ago when I was just using pretty much straight Procreate, and I really like Procreate. The difference between the two putties, if you're not aware, green stuff is originated as a plumber's putty. It's called Needetite. It's a 2-part green epoxy putty, and it's very, very sticky. Particularly, this is very new. And when it's very fresh, it's very, very sticky. It ends up all over your fingers, it falls all over the place. So you have to either sort of put it in the fridge or leave it for 40 minutes or so after mixing it for it to be sort of dry enough that if you push detail into it, it doesn't just stick to your tool and pull it off, and you need to use lubrication and all kinds of things. So it can be a bit messy. Procreate is not like that at all. Procreate is a very firm grey putty, and because it's grey, it's a lot easier for your eye to see what you're pressing in. I think because it's lighter rather than because it doesn't have the green coloration to it, but I could be mistaken on that. It's not so confusing for the eye to look at. The Procreate is also a lot firmer as a putty. So if you press details into green stuff when it's quite fresh, and then you come back to it maybe an hour later, you might need to repress some of those sharp details in. And for really sharp details, it's sometimes necessary to wait till it's completely cured and then trim it with a scalpel to get the edges, because it has a kind of memory to the putty. You push something into it and it pushes back out again as it dries, and Procreate doesn't have that. So you push something into Procreate and it stays exactly as it is. But there were 2 major problems that I was finding with the Procreate. The first was that it doesn't stick easily to an armature because it doesn't have that flexibility to it. You have to really sort of push it and work it in place. And the other problem was that it comes in a tube with a plastic wrapping and bits of paper on either end. And I was finding that I was losing so much putty chopping it off the ends, and it was peeling a load away with the plastic around the outside. So I was losing lots of putty every time I was trying to get any out. And because at that time the only place that I could get it from was a stockist in Spain, I think. It was quite expensive to get hold of, so I was buying a batch. And then I was finding 6 months later, when I came to open a new tube, it had sort of dried out and it was crumbly and it was not working properly. And you could reconstitute it by putting it in the freezer and then mixing it together, but then it reduced the working time that you had on it, and it was just not ideal. So what I ended up doing was mixing about 60% Procreate with 40% green stuff, and that seemed to give the best of both worlds. It would stick a lot better, a lot easier, and it would hold the detail a lot better. But I found that my stock of Procreate essentially dried up to the point where it was not usable. Whereas the green stuff, yeah, if you've had it for a year, it's gonna start not being as sticky at any rate. But I've not, and it goes a bit granular. The yellow stuff does go a bit gritty and you have to pick bits out, so it doesn't last as long. But I find it has a longer shelf life than the Procreate, and that tends to be just what I've fallen into using. I'll mix a bit of milliput with it if I want to do some weapons or some bases that are thin pieces that need to go into a vulcanizer. I'll mix maybe 50% milliput with some of the green stuff. The epoxy putties are good in that instance because you can blend them, you can mix to get different hardness properties. If you were to put a thin slice of this edgeways into a vulcanizer, it would get pressed into like a banana shape with the pressure and the heat that the vulcanizer puts on it to create the molds for the metal casting, whereas milliput is a lot tougher, and so it doesn't do that, which is why I would use the milliput. But I tried using milliput when I first got into sculpting when I was about 14, 15, and for a long time it was all that I was aware of was available, and I really didn't like it because it's very gritty. Even the superfine white stuff is very gritty. It gets on your fingers and then it gets over everything else, and just don't like it. So I've kind of fallen into using green stuff because green stuff is what I have available, and it's what I'm used to using. It tends to be what's on my desk. I will try and go back to the Procreate. I did enjoy using Procreate. I might just have to find smaller amounts and mix those in with the green stuff. I keep meaning to give things like bees putty a try. Bees putty is a polymer clay that's very popular now with a lot of sculptors. Really fine work, some really beautiful sculpts in it, and that's not all down to the putty. A lot of that is down to the skills of the sculptor, but the putty is supposedly very nice to work with. I know a lot of sculptors use Fimo or Sculpey. The cat's unhappy. And I've used Sculpey on larger models. Back when I was doing prop making as a main industry, I've used Sculpey, but I'm not really that familiar with doing small things in Sculpey, trying to get the details into it. So polymer clays are a whole other world than the epoxies that I'm used to, and I should get into it because people are raving about Bees Putty, and it's designed exactly for this process of doing very highly detailed miniature sculpts. But it's an entirely new thing, so I haven't got around to picking any up. So yeah, green stuff is what I'm using at the moment. Let's have a look. Yes. Green stuff is too dark. Yes. Yes, it can be, especially if you're not working under very bright daylight too. It can be very difficult to see what you're working with. You can get, what's it called now? Is it called A and B? I don't know. I'll have a look in the book and I will try and follow that up afterwards. It's an American book on working with historics miniatures that I had many years ago, and it talks about working with Duro and with A and B putty. And I think what it means by A and B putty is very similar. It's a two-part epoxy. You can get it in brown as well. There was some that I picked up at one point that was grey, that was not as sticky as green stuff, but was stickier than Procreate and more plasticky than the milliput, less granular than the milliput. So I'll have a look and try and track. There is a grey version, I think, of the milliput. Epoxy sculpt. So yes, it might well be. That might be what I'm talking about. Right. Let's have a think. What's here? Battle reports and recording woods. Yes, that's something that a lot of people have asked for. At the moment, if I do a battle report from the woods, it would be me playing me. And whilst that would be possible, I also can't see it being particularly interesting. It would appear to be quite scripted, I think, and that's not something that I think would come across particularly well. But before the lockdown happened, I was talking with some friends that I play tested the rules with a lot, and Chris, who's one of them, co-wrote the battles rules in the rule book with me, and we were talking about doing some warband stuff and some battle stuff before the lockdown happened. And I know that they have been painting warbands, so yeah, hopefully stay tuned. We'll try and get some of those up on the channel soon. I'm doing some stuff, well, possibly if the lockdown's over, I'm doing some stuff with the club in June, so maybe we should film some of that as well. Definitely want to get some more video tutorials up. Tutorials, just way. That's always something that is difficult to get across in a rule book, and I spectacularly failed to do that with the first rule book with Secrets of Shandis Holm, because I was writing predominantly a background book with some rules in it. It was not very easy to see what it actually looked like. So what I was trying to do with the new edition was to give those 3 very clear methods of playing the game that would hopefully convey what a game looked like. But it's hard from text and from pretty images in a book to convey what that actually looks like. So yes, I will try. I will try that. There are very polished how to play various war games videos out there, which are a bit intimidating, because obviously they've had a lot of professional shooting and recording and editing and mixing and recording voiceovers in studios and trying, all stuff that takes a lot of time and a lot of money, and I don't have either. So anything that we do would be quite low key, but please do, if you're uncertain about anything, do let me know, either by messaging me on Facebook or by sending an email or something, and I will do my best to respond in the most appropriate medium that I can find to answer those questions. Right, so let's have a look. Okay, so let's go back to these trolls, because I mentioned them earlier. These big chappies here. This is the Wild Jitnir of the Pines. He was part of the Gobinomic Wars Kickstarter, which was Christmas before this one. And I ran out of stock of him at Dragon Meet in December. I have new stock of him in. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to update our website, because the platform that the website is built on did an update just before lockdown hit, which shut me out of the admin privileges. I'm not sure how that works, but the guy who looks after our website and helps me out when there are those kinds of issues is understandably very, very busy at the moment, sorting out other people's issues. He did actually send me a message last night saying that he's looking into it, so I might have access again to be able to adjust the website soon. But if you would like any of these guys, they are back in stock. Send me a message and I can PayPal invoice you for those. The other things that I wanted to get released on the website that would have been released at Salute, now that all the Kickstarter orders have been shipped for those, are the fairies, the fae. So I will hold up a few examples of these. We've got the Raid Master on her white deer, her Fae Nibbana there, and the Fae Queen on her butterfly palanquin. These are up on the website, but they are listed as available soon. As soon as I can get in there, they will be available. But any of those, feel free to send me a message. They're all available now. And then we've got the Hobbias, the donkey-headed chaps, and the armored Fae Marshal there. Those packs are available. And actually, I mentioned this in an earlier video, but I have got excess amounts of these guys. When I picked up the castings, there was a slight miscommunication with how many of these were in a mold. So I have got loads and loads and loads of these. So I put together some special packs, bulk packs of those. And if you go to oakbound.co.uk/sawyourvid, all in one, as SAWYOURVID, all in one word, you'll find special offers on those packs. And one of the sad things about not going to Salute is not being able to meet up with Charlie Earl, who sculpted these guys, I had a good long chat with him at Salute last year, and it talked about him commissioning him to do some stuff for Oakbound, because I'd seen his female miniatures particularly, absolutely beautiful, really, really precise, lovely sculpts. And then on one of the sculpting forums a couple of months later, I saw someone had posted these sort of female pirate figures available with reproduction rights. So I picked those up, modified them to be Fae, and I only realised when they arrived with one of his business cards that he was the same guy that I'd been talking to at Salute. So managed to actually get some of his stuff into the range quicker than I'd intended. But yes, if you're watching, Charlie, thank you for these. They're brilliant. And yeah, a year after talking to you, they're going live and into production. I was asked about I don't use any of these putty at the moment currently, but it's definitely something that I will look into, and I think they are the chap who formulated it it's not the chap who formulated it. The chap who came up with the idea is a miniatures sculptor, and he worked with a chemist friend of his, I believe, to formulate it, and it's gone through several iterations. I'm not sure how many there are now or what the differences are between them. When I did a sculpting thing with Kev White a couple of years ago, he was using I think he was using just the firm stuff, and he was mixing a very, very tiny amount of it in with his epoxy putties, and it changed the properties quite dramatically. It was really nice to work with, but all of his miniatures go into resin masters, and then they are put into metal from high temp resin masters. That's great. It adds a bit more of an expense to the getting of them into production, and because I'm a much smaller company than Hassle Free, my stuff goes straight into vulcanized molds, and I wasn't totally confident that even that small amount of the polymer clay in it wouldn't just cause the figure to swoosh under the huge pressure. So I haven't done that, but it did dramatically change that. Another question that someone has been asking about sculpting, and I'm sorry I didn't get your name and I can't find the comment now, was about the differences in scales, picking up that a lot of people say that their stuff is in 28mm, and that can cover 25mm, and that can cover 35mm and bigger, and that's yeah, totally, absolutely is the case. I think I mentioned that in my video last week when I said that I was looking at a Foundry model for scale reference, because their models, their fantasy models are a lot bigger, but they're historical models because they're working to a historical market that tends to be more consistent, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think more consistent. A lot of their stuff is 28mm, if not on the slightly smaller size. And because I'm sculpting for a range that has is set in a dark age, basically a historical dark age setting, but with fancy elements in it, I'm not producing dark age human figures because there are thousands of them available, loads of people doing them, and mostly people are doing them because they're historical. They are doing them in true 28. So my stuff, my creatures, and all the rest of it is scaled to fit in with a true 28mm, but because they're creatures, there's a bit of flexibility. I mean, it doesn't matter what you put this troll next to. If you put it next to a 25mm human, he looks absolutely enormous. If you put him next to a 35mm, he still looks. So it doesn't really matter. The scale is varied, but if you're sculpting An actual human-sized figure, yes, it needs to fit in. Even though there are variations, obviously people are of different heights, it needs to fit in with what you're working with. So as an example, a lot of the modern Games Workshop Blood Bowl stuff is big, even by Games Workshop standards. Their standalone board game things, I think the Gore Chosen miniatures as well, are big by Games Workshop standards. And when you consider that a Sigmarine is probably all of 35 mil high, that's big. And the reason that they do that is because they don't want you using regular Games Workshop miniatures in Blood Bowl. They want you buying special Blood Bowl miniatures for Blood Bowl. So they mark it out by having a scale difference, no more of this, cutting the axe off and just using him as a character with a bare fist. No, they want you to buy the specific figures. But I think it would be unfair to say that a lot of companies scale their miniatures so that you have to buy their miniatures and you can't mix in things. From a small company point of view, we can't produce quickly all of the miniatures that we need for the game. So we have to make sure that the other ranges and other figures can be included. And if you have a look on our Woods Facebook group, there's a document there that lists figures that are of a suitable style that you might like to use in place of some of the ones that don't exist yet. But the sort of origin of scale creep, as it's been called, really, I think, starts off quite early in the process. I was talking to one of the chaps who used to run Asgard a few years back, and he said that the reason that they went to 28 from 25 mil in the first place, 25 mil was the sort of the standard for a long time, and I think that comes from some of the scale within the model railway community as well. The reason they went to 28 mil was that you could put a bigger head on a 28 mil figure, and that was important because they started sculpting character figures for role-playing games. That's really where the fantasy miniatures market started. And if you were having your character on the table, you wanted them to have lots of character in their expression, in their face, and detail on the body. And it was felt that they could do this easier in 28 mil than in 25 millimeter. So then 28 mil became the standard. And it's sort of gone up from there as the level of detail has increased. So the size of the figures have gone up. But there's also a question of proportion in there as well. So if you look at a figure that has come from Citadel or has come from Asgard, or one of the early companies that had contact with Brian Ansell, if you measure it, you'll find that I think there's 5 heads in the body of a figure. In traditional anatomy, you're looking at 7 to 8 heads to be in proportion. So the heads are quite a lot bigger if you scale them up. They have really big heads and really big hands as well, because your hand is generally put in proportion to your face. It covers your, so they have really big hands and really big heads, so that you can get the character into the model. When miniatures stopped being gaming pieces and started being kind of collectible pieces for painting, for modeling, so companies like Dark Sword, to an extent Reaper, Weird Miniatures kind of adopted this when they started up. They got in people who were either digital sculptors who hadn't come from an analog sculpting background, or they got in sculptors who wanted to keep the heads the same size so you can get the same amount of detail into them, but make the proportions more accurate, so the figure ends up getting a bit taller, so that you've got that 7 to 8 head ratio into the body. And the proportions are a lot better if you scaled them up to full size. They would not look weird as people. But on the small size, they can look kind of stretched. They can look unusual because we're used to seeing figures with that 5-head ratio in the body. So certainly in terms of creating old school looking figures, it's important to get that that ratio in there. But I think that explains part of the reason why things are getting taller, is trying to correct that skew of proportion that comes from having an oversized head. If you just bear with me a second, I will be back before long. Right. It's one of the benefits of not being stuck behind the stands. Get up and leave the. You can get up and leave for a little while. Yes, bigger is better. Yes, Curtis, bigger is always better. That's exactly what they say, isn't it? Yeah. Sometimes that's true. I mean, you might, my previous videos, you might know that we've got a plan for doing some 54mm dungeon bashing at Bring Angen Ed this year. So I've been picking up some of the Tech Tac figures, and it's really satisfying painting the bigger things. My only experience of painting bigger miniatures as a full-size creatures is doing a bit of historic stuff when I was a kid, and that my painting wasn't good enough then for it to show up. But actually, it's really quite satisfying painting bigger miniatures. Yeah, the scaling with historical, I mean, historical miniatures, fantasy sculptors are going to smack me for saying this, but sculpting historical miniatures is a whole other thing. You know, people get very picky about pouches being the right shape and in the right place, and that's totally cool. You know, I get getting the uniforms as accurate as possible. You don't have to worry about that in fantasy, so you need a lot better reference, a lot clearer reference, and you kind of need to know what you're sculpting in terms of the historical world. So yes, historical sculpting is much more exacting. Have you done any 54mm stuff, Curtis? I imagine some of your vehicle bits would make quite good apparatus. It's interesting, because I know that you've got an animation background, and John, who's doing sculpting for my Dreamstone stuff, which I will talk about in a minute, also has a background in animation. It's interesting to me how many people in the war games field have been doing animation stuff. I guess that's, you pick up casting that way. I mean, I know casting because of my prop making stuff, but it's a different application, same process, I guess. Mark Crew has sent me a message asking. Yes, he was asking me about the pronunciation of words. Oh dear, right. This is, I've got a paperback here. I did this in a video already, but it's something that there are now 3 different iterations of the woods for you to pick from. There is paperback versions, print on demand, hardback version from and our original. Here we go. Yes, indeed. Yeah, right. Let me preface this bit by saying I am not a linguist, not even a cunning one. I am not a scholar of Anglo-Saxon or Irish Gaelic or Scottish Gaelic. I'm not. Yes, I am not a speaker of these ancient languages. But it was important to me to use the terms in those languages to differentiate the world that I was creating in this from the kind of I didn't say the Tolkien fantasy, but Tolkien used a lot of Anglo-Saxon. He was a professor of ancient languages, so of course he did. But the language that has become prevalent in fantasy since has a very definite feel to it. So I wanted to go sort of outside of that, and particularly outside of the Warhammer sphere of using sort of faux German, faux Germanic languages. So I decided to pick up the Anglo-Saxon. Let me go through and have a look. So Tuatha, I'm sure you will have that one. That just means the people in Anglo-Saxon. So like the Tuatha, sorry, not in Anglo-Saxon, in Irish Gaelic. So you have the Tuatha De Danann, the people of Danann. So it just means people, humans. Pixies, we know pixies. Boggarts, boogles. Dinadri, that follows that Welsh custom of making a U, an I sound, and a W, a U sound. So Dinadri, are the treatment there. Gilly V, the DH, I believe, is a the sound. If anyone is a scholar of Anglo-Saxon or Gaelic, do let me know if I'm mispronouncing these. I will probably mispronounce some, but hey, it's fantasy, so you pronounce it however you like. Okay, this is a made-up word. The Miri I'm going with, as in think of a mere, swamp, mere, they live in the mere. These are the one-eyed bog monsters, and their culture is a mix of Polynesian and Celtic. They come from this book. Largely, this is a book that I had as a kid, and it's probably really all of this book's fault. Michael Scott, this is your fault that I'm doing this. The first chapter of this is about the Fomorian, is a retelling of a tale from the Irish Book of Invasions, and the back cover is this now quite famous picture by Alan Lee that he let me use as the front cover for the first version of the woods. So the Miri in this world are a combination of that, the Fomorians from the Irish myth, with sort of Polynesian influence, and they have so Tower is the name of the warband, like a tower, a big stone structure tower. Mej is the leader of the tower. Drow is the name for their magic user. I think it's Shalai is the name for their piper. That's also an existing word in. Where did that come from? That might be an Anglo-Saxon word. I don't know. Look it up and tell me when I'm wrong. Losbast is the name for their for their soldiers. Leprechauns we can pronounce, that's fine. Cluricorns, corns, Theodags are the drunken leprechauns. Spriggans, we know about. Corny crows are the leaders of the Spriggans. Shawms, garns, cowries, sprigs. Peck, I'm deciding that that ch is a k sound for the hill gnomes. Nags, they are incorporating a little bit of North American mythology into them. There, Barguests, Balkans, Hookahs, Trows, gnomes. So the gnomes start introducing a little bit of Sami Icelandic names into them that the Haldra also tap into. So Dutkis are the kind of guild leaders of the gnomes. Nokus, the name of the war bands, and the groups of guilds that get together. Metatis, Vahentis, Lysatis, and Kiltages. That's probably wrong. It's probably the first time I've actually spoken those words out loud, so they're probably wrong, but that's how I've written them. The goblins also use a bit of the Icelandic. So Jitnirs are actually Icelandic, but they're Finnish, come from Finnish Scandinavian mythology. Jitnirs, Noides, the shaman, that's an Icelandic term. Bogles and Stalu, meaning red cat, a bit like orcs, vicious goblins. Stalus. Norlocks come from a blend of the Grogoch, which is Grogoch. You can't help it. Grogoch. Got to do it, which is an Irish sort of anti-leprechaun figure, not much represented in folklore, but they're there. A kind of combination of that and Morlocks from H.G. Wells' Time Machine, and a play on the word Nor. So that's how they come out, and they're very Scottish. It's a bit of a pun on the clan rat thing of the Skaven world. That these rat men have this kind of Scottish influence. Pensavich is the name of the leader. I'm not sure if with big rat teeth you could actually make that noise. Maybe you could. And Tregraf, Musgraf, Ladraf, and Duraf. Raf being the Anglo-Saxon rat. I liked the Musgraf. There was a play on muskrat, obviously, so a rat with a musket. The Fae come from. They have a lot of Italian in their terminology. So Cacciatore, and my sister who lived in Italy and has an Italian boyfriend, will be on the phone this afternoon correcting me on all of my pronunciation. This Cacciatore is the name of the leader. Gier, Condottieri, yeah, that's probably the words there. And the reason they have that kind of Italian bent to them is that the Fae are an aggressive, invasive force, and the Book of Invasions in the Irish folklore, a lot of the mythical creatures in there are sort of mythic tellings of actual nationalities that invaded at various times. So there's this sense that the Fae feel very, very alien, not because they're alien creatures, but because they come from a completely different culture that speaks differently, that dresses differently, that looks completely different. And in the sense of coming into a Bronze Age world, there's the idea of this sort of civilizing Roman civilization coming in, changing everything, and then disappearing off again and leaving people to pick up the pieces. So that's kind of what's hinted at in the Fae So they have this kind of Italian Romanesque look, which is why I went for the kind of legionary crests on the Fay Marshal, and I tried to give them this kind of masquerade look, and some of their armor is kind of Landsknecht, looking to try and give them a sense of a more advanced culture than the Bronze Age culture that they're coming into. Brownie Sprites Huldra, we've mentioned. So they have Rim, the war bands, Anforer, the leaders, Sankaratas, Birowigas, Kempestras, and Soturi. That's all from Icelandic, and if anyone, any Sami speakers want to come and correct me, then please do. Huldrauga is a combination of two words, the Huldra, which is an Icelandic word for a type of sort of female spirit, and the Drauga in Scandinavian myth being a kind of revenant tomb spirit. So it's a mashup of those two things to give the impression of this folk that have got lost in the void and corrupted by some thing that has turned them into mindless husks. They have Vaki war bands. We tried to give them quite sort of spiky names. Elatons, their leaders, Hengetons, Hautij, and Manalays are their various ranks. And then the Buka, the fishmen. There's more than a little bit of Lovecraft in there, but Bukas are, they appear in Irish mythology as sort of fishmen. But they're having deep priests. It is all very much a hint to Lovecraft more than anything else. Greystigs, Nucleavies. So yeah, I hope that helps. If nothing else, you can have a laugh at me trying to pronounce words that I've pulled off a Google search engine and tried to make feel something. In fact, I could have a look. These are the books that have been more than a little bit responsible for the naming and the creation of the various bits. They're very good reference books. This one, Folklore, Myths and Legends of Britain, was given to me by a vicar, and it's an encyclopedia, all kinds of very obscure folkloric references that have been very, very helpful. And then Brewer's and Fable is a universally useful book for looking up the ways that various kind of names and symbols have been interpreted throughout the years. So those are old reference books that I've been using a lot in the writing. With regards to the sort of heroic nature of the myths, that was another thing that I wanted to do with the woods. It kind of comes from experiences of playing Warhammer Fantasy roleplay against something like Dungeons and Dragons, for instance, where in Warhammer Fantasy roleplay you're starting off as a rat catcher, and if you get into any combat you are toast until you've got a couple of careers under your belt. Whereas with Dungeons and Dragons, even if you're low level, you're coming in as this stomping great hero, and it's that difference of sort of playing an everyday character just trying to get by as best they can, or playing this kind of mythic hero. And you have both in myths and folklore. Obviously the Irish Book of Invasions and the Mabinogion, the Welsh Chronicles are very concerned with big heroes, with Cuckoo Culzean and the rest of them going off and being part fairy and doing all these kinds of things that normal mortals couldn't think of doing. And then you've got the kind of home spirits in the sense of how it must have been for everyday superstitious peasant folk, believing that they have to appease these various spirits. So that was more the bent that I wanted to go with writing the woods, that this is not high-powered heroes going into a situation. This is everyday folk whose situation has thrust them into the world that they and the world and the situation that they're in. I showed earlier the book, it's from the Michael Scott book. This is another one of the books that was a key influence on me as a child. Although I never actually had it. I had a friend who used to run sort of holiday sessions with school children, and he had a load of these books, and this one I was just endlessly pouring through the classic Brian Froud, Alan Lee Fairies book. So a lot of the creature types from the woods come from this, and are come out from very much a perspective of everyday folk coming into contact with strange creatures beyond their knowledge, and trying to best work out how to deal with those folk. And I was quite pleased last week, as a bit of a lockdown gift to myself. I managed to get hold of a copy of this Castles by Alan Lee, which is kind of the follow-up to that. So I don't doubt that a lot of the folklore in here will get researched and recycled into some future stuff for the woods. Other inspirations that I have had have included the work of Paul Bonner, from his earliest illustrations with Games Workshop, but mostly through his work with the Rackham Confrontation series. Beautiful stuff. And I was hoping that Paul would be able to do some illustration work on the woods, and I hope that might be the case at some point in the future. He was busy on Trogfang when I got the second edition out, so he wasn't able to do any at that point, but I'd love to get him on board. So that book is amazing. And this Josh Kirby, obviously known for his Discworld illustrations, but I remember getting books of his out of the library when I was a kid and pouring through them. Just so many textures and so many things going on in these images, and more concerned with atmosphere and with effect than with any degree of realism. And I think that's something that I've carried forwards into my love of old school miniatures and into my own sculpting, this sense of trying to convey character and not worrying quite, if your anatomy isn't totally there, or if you've got some ridiculous pose that no one would ever be able to hold. As long as you're conveying the character and the atmosphere and the style of something, then that should take precedent. Which doesn't mean you don't need to work on anatomy. It doesn't mean you don't need to work on getting proportions correct, and that's still something that I'm working on. But to me, the character of something has always been the inspiration. And actually, it was last year at Fancy Forest Festival, I was working on some Discworld sculpts just for myself, because obviously the micro arts range exists, but they are, so we're talking about differences in scale and proportions here. They're easily 35 mil, if not slightly bigger than that, and they're much too big to fit in with any of my other miniatures. So one of the things that I wanted to do was to do some sort of more tiny skirmish stuff in Ankh-Morpork with gangs and with assassins and that kind of thing. But the micro arts stuff, I wanted to pick up their watch figures, and I got Nobby, and he was about the same height as a regular 28 mil guardsman, and that's just not. He's a great model, and I use him in my Imperial Guard army now, but the others were just too big, and he was too big to be a knobby knob. So I started sculpting the guards for myself, and rather than put putty things on the tabletop, I decided to get them put into a mold and cast up, and then I painted up just before Christmas a set of the metal casts and sent them to Bernard at the Discworld Emporium just as a kind of Christmas gift. He gave me some sculpting tools a couple of years ago when I went down there with my model of the mended drum for their Christmas display. So I sort of wanted to send in something that I'd done with his sculpting tools as a way of saying thank you, and learn from him that Micro Arts were not continuing with the license. So I thought, oh, maybe there's a gap in the market for some Discworld stuff. I'd love to do some Discworld stuff, but sadly the rights for more merchandising are tied up with the new Guards TV series that the BBC America are doing. A bit uncertain about that, but it's tying up all of the new merchandising rights. But I sent a photo of my painted Guards stuff to the guys who look after the Josh Kirby estate, just as you might like to see this. And it turns out that they hold the rights to the images and have permission to use the Discworld names for use in their shop with the prints. So I'm in communications with them at the moment about getting those Guards models that I did sort of officially licensed through their channels. So that would be exciting. So one of the things that I've got on my desk at the moment is in armature form, the running Rincewind. Where is he? Can I find him? So a while ago. There you go. So doing the running Rincewind figure there, trying to get a model of him just to keep that conversation live while we're on lockdown. But that's something that I'm quite excited about doing. The other exciting thing that is happening at the moment is work on the Dreamstone. I mentioned that earlier on. This is a paper printout of the rulebook. I contacted Martin Gates, who was the producer of the Dreamstone, which you may remember. Some people, I've had the first test casts of some of the models that I did in cabinets at shows for the last year, and quite a few people sort of come over and sort of do a bit of a double take and then point and go, oh, I remember this. So you may remember it. If you don't remember it, check it out. It's on YouTube. It's on Amazon Prime, and DVDs are available if you don't mind them having German covers. The Dreamstone was a kids animation that launched in 1991, I think. No, 1990, because it's 30th anniversary this year. So 1990, ran for 4 seasons, and basically tells the tale of some fluffy green bear creatures who are trying to defend a magical stone that brings good dreams from an evil dragon overlord and his inept kind of orcish servants. And that sounds a bit crappy. It's far better than that. And if you haven't seen it before, check out the Mike Jupp pilot episode that's on YouTube, because from the look of that, it's got a much darker kind of sword and sorcery, heavy metal kind of look to it than the TV series ended up having. And I think that is the aesthetic that I want the roleplay game to have, because I think people who remember the Dreamstone from when they were kids can handle a bit more of a kind of mature dynamic now, would probably fondly remember that kind of sword and sorcery aesthetic as well. So I approached Martin Gates a couple of years back because I wanted to do some miniatures based on the Dreamstone. It's a cartoon that I loved as a kid. and he was very enthusiastic. I sent him some sculpts that I'd done, and he was very enthusiastic. But he said that the merchandising rights were with a Canadian company, so we had to write to the Canadian company, and then they didn't get back in touch. And then I spoke to the guy from Monster Entertainment, who have the video production rights, and he said, no, Canadian company don't have merchandising rights. The merchandising rights are listed on our contract as something to be discussed at a later date. So as far as we're aware, nobody has merchandising rights currently. So I got back in touch with Martin Gates, and by now this was about 8 months on, and he said, okay, we'll give this Canadian company another month to respond, and they didn't respond. So he said, that's fine, so we'll do a deal with you. So so I've got now the rights to do a miniatures range and a role-playing game of the Dreamstone, which is exciting. It was hopefully going to be on Kickstarter this month, and I was going to have painted miniatures at Salute to display for people. But that hasn't happened. The lockdown has pushed everything out. The first batch of sculpts are currently at the casters being mastered, so hopefully I'll get those in the next few weeks. I might even be able to paint them while lockdown is ongoing. I don't know, but we pushed the Kickstarter back to June, so that will be hopefully happening then. I've got one figure on my desk at the moment to finish off, and that's this guy's going to be a Kickstarter exclusive. I'm doing an Earth Gore, or I've done an Earth Gore for, which is one of the characters. I'll show you here's the concept work for Earth Gore, the crazy scientist, and I've done a standard model of him that will be commercially available, but I wanted to do one where he's kind of doing the thing that he does with his arms and his tongue's going out, and he's in sort of weird position, which probably won't survive too many casts in the mold, but it will be a fun thing to have as a Kickstarter exclusive. So I need to get him done. He's currently on my workbench, and he will be the last of the figures that I want to do for the first wave of the Kickstarter. But the role-playing game, I've managed over the last week to do a bit of editing and finish off, bar a couple of pages, the text of the role-playing game, and I sent that off to Martin, and have this morning had an approval from him to say, yeah, it's good to go ahead with that. So so that is happening, and it's with a few people now to be tested, with a few groups to be tested, and we'll collect the results of those and do any necessary editing, and hopefully that will be ready for September, which will be the 30th anniversary of the TV show coming out. In the meantime, I've got a bit more artwork to do for it. A lot of the artwork in here I've managed to grab screenshots from the DVD release. So there's some really pretty artwork in here. Let me find some of the ones of some of the artwork of the Black Mountain. And some of these pages are blank currently, but there's some very atmospheric Mike Jupp artwork in here. And Zordak on the back cover there. But I haven't got artwork for all the characters that I want to have in here, and I was sent by Martin the style guide that was sent to the animators and the guys doing the artwork and the illustrations, that have a few of these coloured in character studies that are very nice and sum up the mood of it quite nicely, but they don't all have coloured in versions. A lot of them are these black and white, so I need to be colouring and scanning some of those in to bulk out the artwork. But that's going well, and hopefully that will be out pretty soon. Yes, I will post up details of those on my Facebook site. Yeah, tell me about the merchandising issues. I have tried. This is the fourth thing I think that I've tried as Oakbound to get some licensing stuff from, and the willingness seems to be there from all. It's just actual getting it in writing and getting things sorted. So one of the first things that I wanted to do was a range of Bucky O'Hare miniatures. If anyone remembers Bucky O'Hare, that was another comic and cartoon series from the 90s. And on my blog, Finn McCall's, I'm currently, I managed just after Christmas to pick up the UK editions of the comic series that was issued, and the first 6 are repeats with slightly different text and slightly different layout of the American ones that were done by Larry Hama, G.I. Joe, Larry Hama, and they're fairly widely available, the continuity comics, American ones, but the ones in the UK were put out by the same guys who did the Beano and the Dandy, and were written by somebody else, but they did 20 editions. The first 6 were repeats of the American ones, and the rest were their own stories written and illustrated by different people. And because they were kids comics from the 90s and they were only available for a couple of years, fortnightly, they're very hard to get hold of. And I used to have them as a kid and got rid of them. Anyway, a few years ago I tried to pick these up again, and a full set was going for £200-300. Not spending that on a bunch of comics. So was very happy, managed for less than £50 to pick up the complete set -1, missing episode 20. If anyone has issue 20, but that one I'm missing. But to pick up the rest of the sets off, the rest of the comics off eBay. Anyway, so that's sort of revived my interest in Bucky O'Hare, and I'm doing a fortnightly thing on my blog as the comics came out. Yeah, really just doing a little post to commemorate each comic on the date that it came out at. But anyway, so I got in touch with Larry Hama probably 4 or 5 years ago, about the possibility of doing some Bucky O'Hare miniatures. And he put me on to the guy at Continuity Comics who hold the rights, and they were very enthusiastic. But I did a SurveyMonkey poll, and people were not, people who liked wargaming didn't remember Bucky O'Hare. People who liked Bucky O'Hare weren't into wargaming, weren't that interested in having the figures, so that didn't go anywhere. Interestingly, I do commission sculpts, and every year I have this chap sends me a list of commission sculpts that he'd like doing at some point, and it's quite good because I can do them when I need money to pay for some molds or something. I can get on with some sculpts, and then quite good to have that as a thing ticking over. And some of the things that he wants doing now are Bucky O'Hare sculpts, so that would be quite fun to actually get around to doing that. Yeah, so I'm going to do a Bucky and a Jenny for him, and we'll see where that leads. It may lead to doing some more things. So that was the first thing that didn't come off. The second thing was a Nightmare board game. So I spoke to David Rowe, who was the artist for the original series of Nightmare. He produced a book of his paintings, and it made me remember Nightmare. Oh yeah, we could do some nice dungeon bashy stuff with Nightmare, slightly different take on dungeon bashing. So I spoke to him, and he put me on to the producer of Nightmare, Tim Charles, I think I can't remember, it's been a while since I spoke to him, but Tim Charles, I think, who was the producer of Nightmare, and we spoke for a couple of years. Chris, who co-wrote Woods with me, Chris and I were working on different ways of doing a kind of puzzle solving adventure dungeon bash thing based on Nightmare, and we came up with some pretty good ideas, and we got to a point where it was ready to sort of start testing the system that we came up with, and David was going to do some more artwork for it, and then everything went very, very quiet. So unfortunately, we didn't get to follow through on that one. But anyway, doing Dreamstone stuff now, and that's good. Yes, I think it'd be a good fit for Dreamstone too. The scale of the figures is bigger. You know, talking about scale again, I've gone for a, you know, maybe 40 to 50 mil for some of the Dreamstone figures, although the small ones, the Noops, are about 18, 20 mil, so they're quite small. There's quite a range in size, but they're all relative sizes to each other, and it's been really nice to work on bigger things, and that, not that big, but you know, bigger things, and that kind of more cartoon look, more graphic look. It reminds me a lot of the Nog in the Nog figures that that David Wood got done, and possibly some of the earlier Asterix figure. I can't remember the company that did the miniatures line of the Asterix figures, but that kind of very big noses and simple shapes. But it's nice doing them, and it's nice doing them analog. I can imagine them being quite easy to do as digital sculpts and coming out very flat and very plain and very soulless. I think it's nice to be doing them as an analog sculpt. Paul wants to know what's on my workbench at the moment. Well, so obviously the Dreamstone stuff is on my workbench. In terms of wood stuff, I've mentioned the Spriggans. I want to redo the Spriggans. I've got a test model of, so you may remember, this guy is the original Knuckle of E figure that I came up with from Oakbound, and I was saying earlier about not liking multi-part models. This is a 3-part model, so this is 1 part, this torso is 1 part, the front of the horse is 1 part, and the legs are 1 part, and it is a big pain to put together. So I have reworked it into a single part model there. So that's a new Knuckle of E sculpt, and that will hopefully be coming out soon. I've got a few other pieces. There's a Yaltog that Ross Hubbard sculpted for me probably about 3 years ago now, possibly even 4 years ago, that hasn't yet got into production, so that needs to go into production. There are a few trolls from the Goblinomic Wars Kickstarter that didn't get funded, and a troll siege tower, and there's the trolls that I bought from Troll Outpost. There's an ice troll and a mutant troll and a troll sort of with his arms behind him. They need to go back into molds because I've sold the casts that I had of them, but I haven't got any molds for them, so they need to go back into molds. I've got some Haldra, I've got some Ice Barbarians on the go. There's one who's a seer with a kind of dragon head that I got as part of the Troll Outpost range, but the staff is very, very thin and the dragon head keeps breaking off. So I need to rework that with a more chunky staff, and also rework the figure so that it fits a bit better into the world. But from that essential model, I've also got 3 other sort of spear and bow warriors now, so I need to be working on that range, extending that range. I mentioned the Spriggans. I want to redo those. I've got an idea for those that is related to something else that I'm working on at the moment. When the lockdown happened, I decided that it might be fun to do a bit of a kind of fighting fantasy book with a few solo play skirmish games in it as well, so that you can kind of play a one-person woods campaign, or you can pick up that to use with perhaps with your kids and play through that together. It's got enough characters in it for up to 5 people to take a character each if you want to play it as a kind of role play thing, or you can play one person with the warband. And the Spriggan thing is related to that. So once I've got a bit more of that writing done, and I'll start a bit more working on the sculpts. I've got those milliput bases that I was talking about with the dragon. I've got those done for the Spriggans. I just need to work detail on top of them. But I was finding doing a bit of sculpting during lockdown was okay, but my mind's not really fully engaged for the sculpting. I find it much easier to pick up stuff and paint it at the moment than sculpting it. But I will try and get back onto the sculpting. So those Spriggans are on my workbench. Here's I showed you the thing of the running Rincewind. There you go. There's a starting very weird armature for him. And then I've got these two. I've got these two little figures that I did as test pieces, as like demonstration pieces with my last video. So I'm still inviting people to send me ideas for what these guys could be turned into. There's a male and a female kind of heroic pose, 28mm figures there. What else is coming up? Well, I've been on a 2-week Easter holiday, so I work for a university in Bristol, teaching architectural and product design model making, and looking after the workshops there. And the university has been closed for 4 weeks because of obviously the pandemic. And while a lot of the teaching is happening online, workshop technicians like myself are not really able to be there and man the workshops because there's no one there to man them for. So I've been sort of video tutorials from home on various modeling techniques, which I might make more generally available once the lockdown's over, but at the moment they're resources for the students who are not able to come into the university. And as part of that, I'm going to be working on a scale model of a part of a bridge in Belgium that's pretty cool. So I'm going to be doing 1 to 50 and 1 to 100 of that, picking that up from next week as part of the university thing. But I might again make that available as part of my general YouTube channel as well, because I think the techniques will be helpful. And the reason that I've chosen those two scales, as well as being fairly common architectural scales, is that the 1 to 50 scale will be the perfect setting for some of the Boroughs and Badgers stuff that I'm painting up currently. They're again bigger than the usual miniatures, so the 1 to 50 scale will be fine for buildings for them. And I've got half of Europe, Demon World, ostensibly 15mm, but they're more like 18mm miniatures, and they will fit fine on the 1 to 100 model. So I'm going to be doing some terrain making in those scales. I've also been asked by a friend to do a Scottish castle model for him, so I may, if I've got enough materials left at the end of the Belgian bridge project, I may be getting on with that for him. And stuff takes a surprisingly long time, so I think that actually that might last till the end of the lockdown, whenever that is. But there's always plenty of ideas in my head for things to do to do otherwise. Lots of things that I want to do. It's just, as always, finding the time, even when you're at home all day, every day. It's not easy to crank stuff through, and having the headspace to be able to do it as well. Like some days, if you're a creative, you'll know this. Like some days, you struggle to pick anything up. You struggle to get on with anything, or when if you force yourself to do something, you end up doing a bad job. So you need to find something that you can do, which is why I like to have a writing project, a sculpting project, a painting project, a modeling project on the go at the same time. Unfortunately, I've got the studio in the house to be able to do that. It's I know it's a luxury, and I'm very grateful to have that. Another little sculpty thing that I've got on the go for when I run out of time and inspiration to do anything else that I will hopefully be doing over this weekend is this little dragon dude here. Much smaller dragon than my big dragon. This guy is an old citadel dragon, I think. And if you've been following along with the lockdown challenges on my little video log, I've been running a weekly challenge in lockdown for those times when you are experiencing a lack of creativity or don't know what thing off your lead pile to pick up and work on next. And they're still there, and there's a Facebook group for it with an album to dump stuff in. So if you want to get involved, do get involved. It's certainly not too late. We did a week on painting the ugliest figure in your collection, and I found out what he is now. Someone told me he is the one that I painted as an alternative armies hill orc from Dresda, I think is the name of the boxed sort of skirmish game that they released. That's what he is. So yeah, he's pretty horrible, and I would not have had him pinned as an orc, but that's what I painted. Then the miniature that's been sat in your painting queue for the longest. Then there was a challenge on painting something that looked like it belonged in the woods, in the world of the woods, not necessarily an Oakbound figure, but anything that fits that kind of folkloric thing. And then this, so this is for this week's challenge, which is to paint something, or to reappropriate, restore, something like that, something which is. And this one comes with a bit of a confession. This was a model that was sent to me by a chap on the Old Hammer forum probably 4 or 5 years ago now, certainly 2 or 3 years ago. And the challenge that was related to was to pass something that you've failed to convert to somebody else to finish the conversion and to make the model good. So this little dragon came to me with a Chaos Warrior's arm stuck on the side of it, and the top's all been shaved down, and the head, it's got a spike, but it looks like it's someone's dabbed it with a soldering iron to try and get the spike up, and it's melted the top of the head there. So that's what I'm going to do for this sort of repair project. I'm going to finally get him finished. So thank you if you were the person who sent him to me. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get around to him. I will try and get him done. But I'm very much seeing this lockdown period as a chance to do some of the kind of little personal low stress projects, and to play around with being a bit sort of creative. I started Oakbound as a way of working on my sculpts and getting some of the stuff that I wanted to see released. And if other people wanted to buy it as well, then that's really cool and really exciting. And that's still how I view it. You know, I put out the stuff that I'm interested in putting out. And whenever other people go, oh, it's really cool, really love seeing your models, really love seeing your stand, really love picking up this. And someone last week told me that they painted the first thing that they painted in a few years, and it was some of my goblins. Yeah, that's really exciting. That gets me. That makes me really happy. But yeah, I started Oakbound because I wanted some miniatures that weren't available, so I thought I'd sculpt them and cast them, and then if other people bought them, then I'd get them for free. And so that's how that started. And I have toyed with the idea of pushing it into a more full-time business, and considered the financial situation that we're in and the kind of stress of making, like, I was a full-time prop maker for several years, and the stress of never knowing when the next job was coming in, never knowing if you were going to pay your bills, was not something that I coped with particularly well. So I think the idea of making Oakbound a full-time business, something that I toyed with for a while, and decided not to pursue at this point. If our overheads come down significantly, then yeah, maybe that might be the case. But at the moment, it's still a kind of hobby business, and so I want to use this lockdown to remind myself that that this started as a hobby for me. It is still a hobby for me. Do something that I'm interested in and I'm excited about, and so at the moment that at the moment on my painting table has been some Imperial Army, Imperial Guard figures. I've used the time to do some work on the Hero Quest diorama that I started. This Earthworm the dragon is actually part of a diorama that I started when I got the Great Spined Dragon with this guy and the Great Spined Dragon, and they've got a little young dragon hunting a water leaper in a pool. So I want to get that underway and finished. And yeah, I think I find it easier to pick up these sort of half-finished things and tie up loose ends at the moment than trying to launch into anything that requires a lot of concentration. So my output for Oakbound has not been as high as I might have expected, but I'm trying to put less pressure on myself and enjoy it a little bit, painting up the fun things. So yeah, that is what I have been that's what I've been working on. Yeah, no, yes, it's hard, isn't it, when you've got the time but not necessarily the kind of mental headspace to be working on something. I want to get some more source books put together. The Barrowing Burning book here that is left over from the first edition, Playing the Woods as a role play game, it is only one of probably a dozen ideas that I haven't found the time or the space to put into source books. So I would like to get some more of these source books out and done. I keep reading things and coming across things and putting ideas on paper and then not tying them together, not finishing them. I have actually done, there is a Warbands campaign that I have finished putting together that would make a similar source book. That has gone to a couple of war games groups that are playing the Woods for them to test it through before I put it into print. So hopefully I'll get some feedback from them, but obviously they're not playing any games at the moment because obviously they're on lockdown, so they're not going to be playing any games of it. But that's underway, and I've got a few pieces of artwork to commission from people for those. But again, I'm not taking any money from Salute, so the money isn't there to pay the artists to produce the artwork to put into the books to sound like some around, so it affects it. But anyway, I want to get some more of those out. I want to say thank you to everyone who has taken advantage of the lockdown deal on War Game Vault, I put at the start of the lockdown the Woods rulebook and Factious Waste rulebook and Barrier Ring Burning on Pay What You Will for PDF editions, and we've sold. We have distributed through that means over 500 copies. So that's 5 times as many rule books as I've sold, physical rule books, as I've sold in the last year. So that's really good. Hopefully that's a lot more people who will be playing the game and engaging with the community. So thank you if you're somebody who has picked those up. Our shop is still open. We still have figures for sale. I'm still able to get to a post office. If you're outside of the UK, I'll be honest, I probably can't guarantee that your stuff will get to you or when it will get to you, because the postal system is a mess. But if you're in the UK, it should still be possible to sell stuff to you. So do check out the website. Hopefully I'll be able to update it again soon. But really, people are asking what is the best thing that they can do to support Oakbound as a company. I mentioned at the beginning, lots of companies rely on Salute for takings for the year. So the best thing you can do to support those companies is to go onto their website and to order some stuff, even if it doesn't arrive until long after the lockdown is finished. The best thing you can do to support them and keep them going is to go and order some stuff. The best thing you can do to support Oakbound is to paint up some stuff that you've already got, whether it's Oakbound miniatures or not, or whether it's something that would fit into the world of the Woods or the world of Factious Waste. If you don't have a copy of the rules for the Woods, or you don't have a copy of the rules for Factious Waste, go onto War Game Vault. As I said, they're pay what you will. You can pay nothing if you want. If you want to pick them up for free, that's fine. They're on there. Pick them up, download them. Put together a little warband out of the miniatures that you've got already, paint it up, take some photos of it, stick it in the Facebook group for the Woods or the Facebook group for Factious Waste, or on our Oakbound page, and tell your friends that you have done it. Because quite frankly, the thing that shows like Salute do for us is publicity. If you're walking around the hall and you see a stand that catches your eye, you stop by and then you learn some things about a cool company that you never knew existed. Whereas I put something on Facebook or somewhere else on the internet, and very few people find it, because the internet is huge and it's very difficult. So for us, the best thing that you can do to support us is a little bit of promotion, and the best form of promotion is always going to be, I played this game and it's really cool, or I painted these miniatures and it's really cool. It's that kind of word of mouth thing. So that's definitely what we need. Thank you, everybody, for doing that. I said I was going to be on until 4. It's what, 7 minutes to 4, 5 minutes to 4. I think I'm going to call it there, partly because I need to go to the loo again. Which doesn't happen at shows because I don't drink that much. I don't drink nearly as much as I should, but because we're on lockdown and we need to keep drinking tea, I've been drinking a lot of liquid. Do that. Apparently that's one of the things that we need to be doing. We need to be washing our hands. You need to be drinking hot liquid, so that if the virus gets into your throat, you can wash it down into your stomach and your stomach will deal with it. I don't know what the science is, but apparently that's the thing you need to do. And I don't need an excuse to drink tea. Especially don't need an excuse to drink tea out of my 2000 AD mug. But I don't need an excuse to drink tea, so I've been drinking plenty of tea, and my bladder is not used to it. So on that lovely note, thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you again in my weekly videos I'm going to be putting up on Wednesdays. So there'll be one this Wednesday where you may see Little Dragon Chat might be finished. If you've got photos of anything from Lockdown Challenge, find our Facebook group. I'll put it in the comments once we're finished. Check that out and upload your photos on there. And I hope to see you elsewhere online in the near future. So stay safe and take care. Cheers. Bye.